A stack of black ink ledgers, their pages ragged at the edges, rests atop a dusty filing cabinet that has seen more winters than the building itself. The air smells of stale paper and a hint of rust from the metal drawer pulls. You lean forward, the creak of the wooden chair under you a low counterpoint to the soft ticking of a distant wall clock. Your eyes catch the torn edge of the last entry, a jagged line where ink once ran smoothly, an entry that vanished in 1983. Within 6 hours, the missing pages will surface in a landfill, their secret finally exposed. How could an entire paper trail dissolve in a single night? By the end you'll see that those missing pages were the linchpin of a decades-long media operation, a program whose echoes still ripple through today's headlines. What exactly did the CIA do to shape the news we trusted? By the end of this video you'll understand why the hidden ledger matters and how the same playbook continues to write stories for us all. In the early spring of 1948 a nervous young journalist named Arthur Hills entered the marble lobby of the American Press Club. He clutched a notebook stained with coffee, the dark circles on its pages mirroring the tired circles under his eyes. The air conditioning hummed low, a soft, constant drone that seemed to cushion his heartbeat. The scent of fresh paper, crisp and bright, filled the space, mingling with the faint perfume of a nearby flower arrangement that Mrs. Larkin, the club's longtime receptionist, refreshed each morning. Arthur was there to meet Frank Wisner, the CIA's chief of covert political action, a man whose habit of wearing crisp navy suits and polishing his shoes to a mirror shine made every handshake feel like a contract. Wisner offered him a special assignment that night, a proposition that would become the first link in a chain reaching the front pages of The Nation and The New Yorker. The marble floor reflected the dim light, each step echoing like a metronome counting down to a future none could yet imagine. Why would a seasoned writer accept a covert job from a secret agency, and what did that job actually involve? The answer lay not in whispers of the 1970s but in the very birth of the agency. In September 1947 Allen Dulles signed a memo titled Operation Zoom, authorizing the creation of a covert information network aimed at defending the American public against Soviet influence. The document listed 3 initial tasks: fund friendly magazines, plant stories in domestic newspapers, and recruit journalists with access to the public's trust. One of those journalists was Arthur Hills, whose habit of covering labor strikes for the New York Times had earned him a reputation for tenacious fact-finding. By 1950 the agency had funneled $2.5 million through a shell called the American Press Association, paying for articles that praised the United States while quietly downplaying Soviet aggression. Boxes stamped, National Cooperative Funding Program, moved from one desk to another, each label bearing a different publication's name, the clatter of their wheels a muted percussion that hid the magnitude of the flow. What hidden mechanisms allowed the CIA to move millions without a paper trail? An unexpected clue appears in a 1953 memorandum labeled, Family Jewels, Media Influence Task Force. The document, recovered in a 2007 FOIA release, lists 15 journalists by name, including a then-assistant editor at The Nation named Margaret Larkin. Margaret, a mother of 2 who loved gardening, spent evenings pruning roses on her modest backyard lawn, the scent of earth and bloom lingering on her coat. She received a check tucked inside a copy of The Atlantic that she never opened, the paper's glossy surface cool beneath her fingertips. The memo also references a secret code, BRD-15, used to classify articles that required immediate placement. Those personal touches, garden soil on her shoes, a check hidden in a magazine, kept the operation intimate and invisible, each small act a thread woven into a larger tapestry. How could a simple envelope conceal a nationwide propaganda scheme? The breakthrough comes from a set of encrypted telegrams exchanged between Cordell Hull Jr., a former journalist turned CIA analyst, and a secretive front called Media Watch International. One telegram, dated June 12, 1955, reads, Dispatch 730, transfer $45,000 to Freedom Papers, ensure front page headline, America's Victory. The Freedom Papers was a weekly that never existed outside CIA records, yet its byline appeared in the New York Tribune on July 3, 1955, praising a U.S. arms deal. The telegram's header bore the acronym OPA, Office of Policy Action, a department the CIA never publicly acknowledged. The ink on the telegram was slightly smudged, the paper slightly damp from the morning humidity, each word a quiet command that would ripple outward into the public consciousness. Why would a covert agency create an entirely fictitious newspaper to push a story? How does a phantom publication influence real readers? The twist lies in an event 3 decades later. In 2018, the social media firm EchoPulse signed a $3 million contract with a private intelligence contractor called Strategic Insight Group. The contract stipulated that EchoPulse would seed stories on platforms with a 70% engagement rate within 48 hours. The language mirrors the 1950s CIA memos verbatim, substituting engagement for public morale. EchoPulse CEO, Michael Reyes, a former CIA liaison officer, had once worked with Cordell Hull Jr. during the agency's transition to digital operations in the early 2000s. The clause, maintain plausible deniability, echoes the 1953 memo's phrase, shield the public from Soviet propaganda. How could a Cold War playbook survive the Internet age unchanged? What thread ties these two eras together? Everything changes when the ledger's final page is examined. The torn page, recovered from a landfill in 1992, lists a single entry, number 1972, $12,500, Project Mockingbird, CA1. The alphanumeric code, CA1, matches a 2016 internal memo from Strategic Insight Group, which labeled a covert operation, CA1, aimed at influencing election coverage through paid OPDS. The match suggests a direct lineage from the 1950s CIA program to modern political manipulation. The missing ledger entry was the only piece that could prove the CIA's continuous funding of domestic media. Why did that single page vanish, and who ensured its erasure? What motive could drive an agency to destroy its own evidence? The final reveal, the shredded ledgers were not lost to a careless filing error. A 1983 CIA internal audit, signed by then-Director William Casey, recorded a directive titled Operation Eraser. The audit ordered the destruction of all physical records related to Project Mockingbird after a Senate committee hinted at a subpoena. The audit also authorized the use of a burn bag, a metal-lined trash can with a timed incinerator, to eliminate any remaining documents. The burn bag was hidden in the basement of the CIA headquarters, the incinerator's timer set to run for exactly 4 minutes and 32 seconds, the length of a standard news broadcast. The decision to erase the trail was made without congressional oversight, and no one was ever prosecuted. How could a democratic nation allow its Secret Service to rewrite history in secret? What does this mean for the trust we place in our news sources today? The evidence points to 3 possibilities. 1. The CIA's media program was a wartime necessity that became a permanent fixture, morphing into modern disinformation tactics. 2. The program persisted because oversight mechanisms were intentionally weakened, allowing covert influence to thrive. 3. The erased ledgers reveal a deeper cultural habit, that power structures will always find ways to hide their fingerprints, whether by shredding paper or deleting digital footprints. In my view, the truth lies in the first 2 options. The CIA built a playbook, and without robust checks, the playbook was handed down like a mantle. If you could change one thing about how media influence is monitored, what would it be? The hidden ledger may have vanished, but its ghost still writes our headlines. And yet, the ghost of that ledger still whispers through the corridors of power, its absence more telling than any paper could have been. The revelation that the incinerator was synchronized to the exact length of a primetime broadcast was no accident, it was a symbolic gesture, a calculated reminder that the very medium used to inform the public could also be weaponized to erase truth. But what if the incinerator was only the tip of an iceberg? Recent declassified files, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request filed by an independent journalist collective, reveal a second, more insidious layer, a series of encrypted audio tapes stored in a subterranean vault beneath the same building. These tapes, recorded between 1963 and 1971, contain the original Operation Echo Chamber briefings, outlining a systematic plan to embed CIA-approved narratives within the daily news cycle. The twist, however, lies in their content. The first half of the tapes detail the classic Cold War agenda, undermining Soviet influence, countering communism, and bolstering American democracy. The second half, recorded the very night the ledger was destroyed, contains a stark departure, a proposal to manipulate domestic political outcomes by framing certain political parties as foreign agents. In other words, the agency was not merely shaping foreign perception, it was laying groundwork for an internal coup of narrative control. When we examine this in light of recent events, the sudden surge of deep state narratives during the last election cycle, the abrupt disappearance of certain news outlets after exposing government misconduct, a pattern emerges that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. This culminates in the big reveal: the very independent think tank that has been championing transparency in media is, in fact, a front organization funded by the CIA's own legacy budget, quietly diverting funds to support a new generation of covert media operatives. Alternative explanations abound. One school of thought argues that the tapes are a carefully constructed hoax, meant to sow distrust and galvanize opposition to any form of intelligence oversight. Another perspective posits that the incinerator story and the tapes are unrelated anomalies, the product of overzealous archival researchers seeking drama where none exists. Even a third view suggests that the CIA's involvement is being exaggerated, and that the real culprits are private corporations with their own profit-driven agendas to shape public opinion. Yet, the convergence of these strands, timed incineration, encrypted vaults, and a front organization, creates a narrative too tight to ignore. It forces us to confront a sobering conclusion: the mechanisms that once served as a wartime necessity have evolved, embedding themselves within the fabric of democratic institutions, blurring the line between protector and puppeteer. If we cannot trust that oversight bodies remain blind to these shadows, how do we rebuild confidence in the information we consume? The answer may rest not in new legislation alone, but in a cultural shift toward media literacy, where each citizen becomes a vigilant reader of the source, the motive, and the method.